Welcome, everyone. This is your event host. I'm Emily Walzer. I'm happy to be here. Could everybody maybe give me a thumbs up if you can hear me? Can I see any thumbs? Yes, I can see some thumbs. Okay, I think it should be good to go. Greetings, everyone. RJ Julia and BookHampton are so pleased to host Carl Safina, who will be in conversation this evening with Andy Revkin. I have just a few housekeeping details of note, and then we'll get rolling. You are muted, and we will keep you that way throughout the event. Please, though, feel free to ask questions in the chat box function on your screen, and we will get to as many of those as possible. For best viewing, please use the Zoom view functions on the top right of your screen and select speaker view. That way our guests are highlighted. Gallery shows everyone participating if you prefer. Of course, we hope you all purchase a book. Links will be provided in the chat box throughout, and that should make purchasing very easy. So I am going to just give a very brief intro to sort of set the stage for this evening for Carl and Andrew to have a terrific conversation. So just want to say a couple of things. For me, and perhaps like many of you over the last few months, we've been dealing with the pandemic, sheltering in place and spending a lot of times in our yards or on our stoops or wherever. And I anyway have noticed while we are kind of languishing, us humans, then wildlife in my neighborhood is actually thriving. And ospreys are zooming around and blue jays are going crazy and hawks, and Mr. Fox walks up my driveway in the evening, and the deer and all. So I think this is such a great time for Carl's book, Becoming Wild, because he really brings to fore all the wonders of our natural world. And I think we are really all appreciating that perhaps more than we ever have before. Carl takes us readers around the world on his research adventures that reveal how 3 different animal cultures raise families, create beauty, and achieve peace. In my mind, what I particularly liked is that his writing blends science with sort of lifestyle. And I know you'll really enjoy hearing this evening's discoveries that Carl had on his trips. I just want to show everyone, this is what the book looks like. It's a fabulous cover. You can see all my sticky notes of all the things I noted of interest. I think there are about 40 of them in there. So I really highly recommend the book. It's fantastic. I just want to say a couple words about Carl and Andy. I'm going to keep it short, but their resumes are long. They are both renowned in their professions and experts in their respective fields of study. Their achievements could go on and fill the entire evening. So here are just a few highlights. New York Times best-selling author Carl Safina is the first endowed professor for nature and humanity at Stony Brook University and founding president of the not-for-profit Safina Center. His writing has won MacArthur Genius Prize, Pew, Guggenheim, and National Science Foundation fellowships. Book awards from Lannan Foundation, Orion Magazine, and the National Academies, and the John Burroughs, James Beard, and George Rabb medals. Impressive. Andy Revkin is an honored and experienced environmental journalist, founding director of the new initiative on communication and sustainability at Columbia University's Earth Institute. Mr. Revkin has written on climate change for more than 30 years, reporting from the North Pole to the White House and the Amazon rainforest to the Vatican, mostly for the New York Times. He has held positions at National Geographic and Discover Magazine and won the top awards in science journalism multiple times, along with the Guggenheim Fellowship. I'm going to let these gentlemen take it from here. I know you'll have a great time. Please ask questions. We'll do our best to get what we can handle in the next hour, but I'm going to let Andy and Carl get things rolling. Thank you all.
Thank you, Emily, and thanks to the bookstores for organizing this. It's wonderful to be with you, Carl, although I'm not there at Lazy Point. I urge everyone to read Carl's book about Lazy Point. It's a reflective essay that was tucked in among the books that you're probably most famous for, but it gives pleasure to me to look back at it because I've spent time with you out there walking the beach, clamming and fishing. And up here in the Hudson Valley, the river is just not the same. I grew up on the ocean, so I'm totally jealous too. I'd like to start with a little bit of reflection from you about the pandemic. I mean, the book is Becoming Wild, but in the last 6 months, we've become much more biologically connected than we ever really thought we were. You know, humans in the 21st century, those of us in rich countries, particularly, are largely insulated from biology that's wild, that's not within our control. You know, this pandemic threat has been there in the system, waiting to test these potentialities and cross species boundaries, and something jumped 2 or 3 species, and now it's completely transformed everything around us, everything, literally, in ways that have deep uncertainty going forward. So, you know, in reflecting so long in your books and your work in marine science about humans and nature, the control of nature, we always still think, I think we're in charge in some way or other. What lesson do you draw from where we're at right now, just before we dive into the book itself?
Oh, I think there may be 2 main very different things. One is that I was trying to think about which one to say first. Well, let's start with the good news. The good news is that many people have been experiencing a season with a silver lining, being that they're around nature more, they're outdoors more, they're with their families more, they're throttling back, looking around, and doing that most important thing, paying attention. Our mutual friend Paul Greenberg just sent me a text this afternoon saying, despite all the difficulties, this has been in many ways a fantastic summer so far, because instead of being in Lower Manhattan, he's been on the east end of Long Island, he's been in the Adirondacks, he's been out with his son and spending a lot of quality time. He was, I think, the first person to tell me this spring, you know, the birds are very loud this year. And I told him the birds are not louder than they ever were. You're just hearing them finally.
Right.
Because some of our noise has quieted down. So
there was just a paper, by the way, there was just a paper that said the oceans, the amount of background noise from humanity in the oceans is about half of what it normally is.
Yes, I saw that. I just saw that this afternoon. Right. They're actually measuring the change in the volume of human-caused noise, which is really, I mean, if you try to find yourself somewhere where you can't hear a motor going, you'll realize how really thoroughly we saturate the world around us with the engines of our, you know, our work and our activities. But then also, I think more recently, it seems like everything beeps and buzzes for our attention all the time. You know, when I'm trying to write and people are trying to just text me off the top of their head all day long, it's very difficult. So, so there's all of that. And that's the good news. So the bad news is that while we are not in control of this pandemic, it happened because of us and because of our broken relationship with the living world. There have been a series of epidemics, an accelerating series of epidemics in the last few decades that almost all have to do with a new thing that we're doing with animals that is that involves brutality, mostly eating them in ways that we didn't before, selling them in ways that we didn't before, trafficking them, jamming them up against each other in ways and in places where in the wild they would never meet. And this has caused this incredible viral test tube where viruses have taken the opportunity, so to speak, to try some new things, and it's brought them into new species, and then they hit the jackpot, a species with 7 billion potential victims.
All linked by transit and everything else.
Yeah.
Easy to hopscotch around, right?
Yes, I mean, the fact that all these people in rainforest tribes are getting sick just shows you how totally connected our species is. There just seems to be almost no place that is, you know, not in physical contact with people from away.
And here we are navigating that with our deeply imperfect traits. Now we're going to dive into the book, which is about traits and capacities and culture. And some of our human traits haven't served us very well in this 21st century so far.
No, we have some perfecting that we could be doing.
You know, and you say in the book at one place, "Can we be better apes?" And part of the book we'll get to in a few minutes talks about our brethren, and not every species gets to name itself. H. sapiens. I'm sure you've joked about the sapiens part. Sapiens meaning
Yes.
wise.
Yes, we name our, the name that we gave ourselves shows a lot about our hubris. We call us the wise human or wise man.
Yeah. Right.
And, wisdom is the ability, I think my definition of wisdom anyway, is the ability to use experience to make the right decisions. And look at the messes that we are in for many of the same things that we've been in a mess about for centuries.
Yeah.
Or things like the pandemic that we easily saw coming.
Oh yeah.
Many different books have been written, one of them called The Coming Plague. And what has that done to affect policy? Obviously not enough.
No, Laurie Garrett, she's been on my webcast at the Earth Institute probably 8 times. She wrote that book in 1995.
Right.
And here we are. So here we go into the book. As in your previous book, you pick several subjects. I mean species. And I'd like to get into why you chose the ones you did. But first, I just want to make sure everyone gets a quick picture of your journey as a writer and as an explorer of biology and nature. You've kind of had this, it's interesting to me as having known you for 20 plus years and watching your trajectory, you started kind of globally, the voyage of the albatross, the voyage of the great turtles. And it was about plumbing those journeys, and you get to know the species along the way and the history. And it was all marine, except the birds that fly over the ocean. And then there was this turning point. You had written one book, the book you wrote about the Gulf spill, which is sort of a practical journalistic book about a terrible disaster. And then you got personal. You kind of dove into behavior of animals in a way that wasn't in the earlier books, I think. It was there always, but not so. What drew you to become a student of individual behavior of animals and species?
Yeah, well,
after that journey.
The first books you mentioned as my earlier work were all after I was 45 years old. So I don't see that as part of my earlier journey. What my early journey consisted of staying in my pigeon coop when I was about 7 or 8 years old. I started raising homing pigeons when I was in 2nd grade in Brooklyn. And they were very much individuals to me. They had names, they were recognizable, they had stable mates. Their relationships looked a lot like our relationships across the yard in the apartment building we were in. They lived in a little stack of fruit crates in the coop. They decided who they were going to mate with or marry, and they left for a period of time every day. They came back and had supper and fed their kids and went to bed. And we were doing exactly the same thing across the yard in our tenement. So very early, my first impression of other animals is that the broad strokes of animal life are really just about the same. And I once stayed in the coop for a few hours because I knew one particular pigeon was due to lay an egg, and I wanted to see what it looks like when a bird lays an egg. So I just sat and watched him. I knew it was coming. Then I, had a number of wild animal pets, hawks and owls and things like that. I trained hawks. That's very much an individual relationship. Sure. When you capture a wild hawk and then it becomes a hunting partner, or you become its hunting partner, actually. And you start to really, be very attuned to a lot of nuances in what they do and how they perceive things and how fast they react. And I remember it really upping my reaction time to try to keep up with the responses of some of these birds. So then I studied individual birds on their individual territories when I was an undergraduate. Then I studied a lot of birds on their territories when I was a graduate student. I studied terns and skimmers. So that's, at that point, I was sort of branching out. And then by the end of the time I was a student, the problems in the ocean were becoming very apparent. And as we've said, you know, I live here near the ocean, and I've always done a lot of fishing, very ocean oriented. If you're oriented toward nature and you're on Long Island, you are oriented toward the ocean to a large measure. And I wanted to do something to try to be involved with helping these problems get better. So I started working very heavily with ocean conservation, especially fisheries policy. And I did that when I was mostly in my mid to late 30s. Then I began writing a lot about that. And my first 3 books came directly off of that trajectory. My last several books have gone back to my original interest, which is what do animals do and why do they do those things? And that has brought me, I think, back into a deeper conversation, if you will, or deeper ways of observing the capabilities of other animals. And this most recent book is about a particular capacity that not all have, but a surprising number do, which is culture.
Right.
And what culture is. And culture for them and for us actually is the same things, although it looks very different on the surface.
Yeah, you know, when I think back to college and I was studying Konrad Lorenz, and there was a very mechanistic, most of what I learned didn't seem to be about culture, which is what we'll spend the rest of this chat talking about. It was about instinct and the imprinted basic aspects of animal behavior, which many of which we have as well.
Right.
And I remember, like, there's some birds. Oh, right. If you have a kite that looks like, if you fly a kite over a barnyard with a hawk pattern, and it's the hawk shape that all the chickens flee. If you reverse the shape so that the tail is short and the head is long, they don't flee. So it's so ingrained. There's something about that shape in the certain configuration that makes the birds react. And here we are now, you're talking about sperm whales and macaws and chimpanzees and all the stuff that isn't like that. That's a behavior or a trait that is absorbed through your relationships with the animals around you. So let's dive into that almost literally. And of course, I do have to ask how you ended up choosing your subjects, as I said. So why sperm whales, why macaws, and why chimps?
Well, I always think it's a good idea to try to have a big idea and choose 3 examples. I think that works pretty well. And so why those examples, the ones you mentioned, macaws, sperm whales, and chimps. Looking across the array of species that have culture. So, well, first of all, what is culture? Culture is the habits, the traditions, the preferences, and the attractions that are learned socially. Usually you start to learn them from your mother, but you learn them basically all from your social group. So they flow socially. We have a lot of culture, and many other animals also have a lot of culture. And if you think about raising an animal entirely in captivity and then just letting it go, you realize that part of the reason that the odds are so stacked against it is it did not have parents to show it what we eat or where we go to find food or what is dangerous or where shelter is. So that's just a little hint at how culture functions in other animals. But what culture is, those things that we learn from social groups, it answers the question of how do we live here where we happen to live. So it can vary from place to place and from group to group, which it very much does in humans, but it very much does in other animals. That's a large part of what makes it culture, and how you can tell by looking at it whether it's cultural and socially learned or whether it's instinctive. And all animals have instinctive capacities that allow them to learn certain things. So for instance, humans have an instinct for learning human language. We're born that way, it's genetic, but what language we learn is entirely cultural. And it more or less works along those lines for all the other cultural beings. So I did want to answer your question, I wanted to get an array of species. I didn't want to have, only mammals. I wanted to make sure there was a bird in there. I wanted to go below the ocean as well as into the forests. And also, I had to pick some that were really very well studied. So culture is very well studied now in sperm whales and in chimpanzees. Not so much in the parrots and in the macaws that I focused on. And but I was very, very intrigued by what looked to me like a tremendous orientation toward social skills and social learning. And so I took a little bit of a flyer, no pun intended, on going with those birds. And I went to the Peruvian Amazon to be with them and be with some scientists there for a few weeks. And that was, well, all of it was absolutely fantastic.
Well, let's start with sperm whales. And the other thing I think the book is very rich in is describing the culture of those who are studying the culture of animals. Mm-hmm. Your guides, the people who give you that depth of understanding, so you don't have to spend 30 years in the field with each of these species. They're a particular breed as well.
I go with people who've spent 30 or 40 years and they tell me everything they've learned because they're very, very generous. They're really, in a way, I guess they're my favorite kind of people, is people who study animals in remote field locations.
And not only that, then of course, in the history parts of the stories, you take us back in time. One of the most fascinating characters to me in the sperm whale section was Thomas Beale, who was on these whaling ships there amid all the carnage and, the violence of harvesting whales. And he was meticulously observing the culture of the whales, the behavior, how the babies and the mothers related, how the whale pods of whales, are sperm whales also called pods? They reacted to the vessels and stuff. He was there. I was almost going to read a passage where he just, one of his descriptions is so vivid. He says, they are also not.
He's a physician on these ships, and obviously a very, very talented scientist and a really unbiased observer at a time when everything about them was very unknown and very biased.
Well, just imagining yourself on a whaling ship, and they're not big ships, and you're surrounded by all this activity because the only time you're seeing the whales is when they're being hunted. And you're saying the females are very remarkable for their attachment to their young, which they may be frequently seen urging and assisting to escape from danger. They're also not less remarkable for their strong feelings of sociality, and it goes on. Darwin, of course, took the same kinds of notes when he was on his vessel, and that's all utterly intriguing to me. But tell me a little bit about, I think it's Shane, who is the person who was your sperm whale?
Yeah, Shane Garrow.
Yeah, maybe give a little word picture of what that work is like. And again, it's all about sound, because one of the most interesting things about sperm whales that you wrote was that the females, they're all like the ultimate working mom. 4/5 of the time, they're 2 miles down in the ocean, or well, a mile or 3,000 meters down, and the baby is waiting up at the top with some auntie taking care of the baby.
Right. They have their culture is based around babysitting. They have a babysitting culture, and it's very much like elephants, that they live in female-led families. The females stay with their birth family for their entire lives. The males at adolescence leave. They're sort of ushered out of the family by the females, and they become independent. They have a different kind of social life. But so because the whales are down foraging in very deep water, which is essentially totally dark and frigid cold, for about 50 minutes out of every hour, we don't climb the masts of tall ships waiting for them. We're in an outboard boat. We drop a microphone into the water, and we listen for the clicks of these whales' sonar, which is the loudest sound produced by a living thing and can be heard from about 5 miles away. You think about what power it takes to vibrate a sphere of ocean that's 10 miles in diameter. It's pretty mind-boggling. So if we don't hear them, we go to his next stop. He has GPS coordinates marked in his machine, and we stop there and put the microphone down again. Some days you don't hear any, and some days there are a bunch of families around. You hear them every time you stop the boat.
And that was such an extraordinary region. You were running into all these other whale species that I have never even heard the names of. There were several small whales and dolphin species. Must have been a remarkable general experience.
Oh, absolutely remarkable. And that early, I think it was the first day, we just ran into quite a few other kinds of marine mammals, a couple of which I had never heard of, like Fraser's dolphin. I didn't know about Fraser's dolphin. I had never seen false killer whales before. I had only heard about them. I don't think I would have noticed any of them, or I wouldn't have noticed 80% of them anyway, if it wasn't for Shane. And, you know, these people are unbelievable super hunting experts. Their senses for what they're looking for are so tuned up that it's really fantastic to be around people like that.
There was a section that in that section of the book that reminded me so much of something I wrote about for the Times at least 10 years ago. You might even have referred to this study. It was about elephant memory and the importance of maternal leaderships in these communities, where there was a study, I can't remember which country, when a severe drought had occurred. It was the mother's memory of where to go during droughts that could save a group of elephants. So when the predation, the poaching took away these big moms, the families lost, the herds lost the capacity to know where to go when there's a drought. And that,
right.
I think there's some mention you made, I can't remember specifically related to sperm whales, and you also talk about elephants. And that's something that I think is so important when we think about culture. It also gets lost.
That's one of the most important things about culture, is that it's a form of transmitting the collective learning of many generations, and it can get lost, and it can get lost more quickly and more thoroughly than the basic genetic information of a species. So when we think something is endangered and we start to get concerned, all those places where that endangered species no longer lives may very well, and in many cases did, harbor culture about how do we live here? Where is the summer range? Where do we go in cold weather? What do we do in droughts? The elephants that you mentioned, it's not just a matter of if they have old matriarchs, they will do okay in a drought. It's a matter of particular matriarchs that remember where the last water was, have different memories of different last resources of water.
Right.
And in Kenya recently, in Amboseli, one of the families lost something, I can't remember the number, it's in the book, but it was something like 13 individuals, and another family lost no one in the same drought, in the same region. Obviously, one family's matriarch really knew something that the other matriarch desperately didn't know. So that's why individuals and their learning and how they can pass this learning along makes the difference between life and death.
You know, my webcast recently at the Earth Institute, I had on some journalists who were covering the Amazon and other areas under the COVID-19 assault that you mentioned a minute ago. And their human culture is going away. It's the elders who are most vulnerable, obviously, and they're dying at a rate that's hasn't been seen in a long time. And that's unfolding even as we speak right now.
That's horrifying. And of course, you know, in the last few centuries, the numbers of human cultures that have gone extinct is another great, great loss to this planet. All that diversity, all those different ways of looking at the world. It would be a terrible fate if humanity boils down to one way of looking at things, and it's not the best way.
Yeah, I know. I've written about that concept of response diversity as an adaptive trait in a species, in an ecosystem. In other words, if every ant responded the same way to a threat, you wouldn't have the plasticity that keeps something functioning.
That's basically why we have sex in the animal, well, in the living world, is that the response diversity is caused by constantly recombining these genes. Every single generation has a bunch of different things that it can try out as the world around it changes.
So let's move to beauty and then to peace. And why did you choose those compartments, those themes, family, beauty, and peace? But then talk about the macaws and what drew you to that specific scenario.
Yeah, those themes, I did not choose them. They chose me. They emerged from the material and the creatures when I was very late in the last stages of working on the book. And I started to just say, well, what does each of these mostly seem to tell us about their life and about life in general? And for the sperm whales, it is mostly about family. For the macaws, it's mostly the lessons that I learned about beauty and the things I inferred about beauty. And then chimpanzees, we see them as being often very violent. They live in a male-dominated society. That the most dominant individual is always a male and always achieves that dominance through a physical struggle with somebody else, or with a coalition that physically struggles.
Let me read a line. Okay. I'm going to quote you here.
Okay.
Virtually all the problems chimps create for themselves are caused by male aggression driven by male obsession with male status. So, yikes.
Yes, a little too familiar.
Right.
Chimpanzees are also one of the very, very rare creatures where not only are they hostile to groups outside their territory, other groups of the same species, which is not too uncommon, but a chimpanzee that if you're a chimpanzee that you've known for 20 years might murder you. And chimps and humans are maybe the only animals where that could happen. Yet, like us, they have skills for calming those problems down, and that allows the group to be a stable unit and to benefit from the benefits of being in a group. Otherwise, the question occurred to me, why doesn't everybody just leave? All this screaming and all this unpleasant and all this struggle for domination.
You said it was actually hard for you to, you said it was hard for you to even stay. It
got old. And it was a little too close for comfort. But then the scientist I was with, she said to me, you're getting a skewed view, because first of all, we've been following the most dominant males because she was studying interactions, and a lot of the interactions occur around the most dominant males. And she said, in a couple of days when it's my day off, we'll go to the other community and we'll hang out with the females of that community. And it was very, very different. But also you see all the time the tension reducing skills that they have. In humans, we call it kiss and make up. We need some way to get past these problems, or else every important relationship we have will fall apart. Because if you live near other individuals, tension and strife is inevitable. So you must have skills to undo the tension and get past the strife. And they have those kinds of skills. We all, many of us have seen on nature shows chimpanzees grooming each other, and that's one of the things that they do a lot to say, we're still good, or we've made up, or that kind of thing. But if it's really bad, sometimes there'll be a mediator, somebody who does not have a problem with either of the ones who have just had a very bad altercation or a very bad fight, and she may get them to come and groom her, or she may start grooming both of them and then get them to move closer together and then back off, so that now they're grooming each other without either of them sort of losing face about who started the reconciliation. And if you watch and you have a really great interpreter like I had, this woman who's been studying them for 20 years, you do start to see that their lives and their world are full of nuance, and it's incredibly interesting.
And here we are now locked online with all the nuance in our online intercourse, meaning, commerce and ideas being lost on Twitter and Facebook. One thing I've been trying to do since I was a blogger at the New York Times, I was a reporter for 14 years. And then I created the blog.earth, which is much more about conversation and working out pathways towards sustainability. And you could see the brittleness of online debate is just so, it misses all of those elements. Yeah. I tried to introduce it at one point by having people post little videos of themselves, like YouTube videos. Hi, here's Wang Suya in Tokyo. She posted a video saying, "Hi, I'm Wang Suya." So at least there was a face instead of just words. Yeah. And I think that's a problem for the human species right now. We're so brittle and implastic in how we don't have time for nuance. I don't know if you feel that is something that resonates for you.
Well, one of the main things that culture does is, because it answers the question, how do we live here? It brings individuals together into groups. So it makes groups form. But then those groups tend to avoid other groups because the other groups don't have the same answer to the question of how do we live here? And if they try to interact, they will get confused about what's expected and what to do. In human culture, a good example is if I go to shake your hand and you try to bow, we're not really cooperating and interacting properly. We're confused about what is expected of us.
Even more so these days.
Yes. So the online culture is worse in that regard because it allows these groups to form and repel or be hostile to other groups without really ever having to come face to face or really ever needing to test whether their way of doing things is the best way or whether somebody else has a better innovation that they could incorporate. Right. So the insulation there that I think the online culture and social media are reinforcing is just making everybody dig into these trenches, and it's not good. There's a lot of great things about it. We all use it a lot, but that aspect of it is very destructive.
I think we're going to go to Q&A now.
Yeah, I'm going to jump in for a second. It's been a great conversation. We do have a couple questions. One, you just kind of touched on, talking about chimpanzees. One of the guests asked, does their aggression have anything to do with overpopulation or resource scarcity?
Aggression almost always has to do with resource scarcity, and the most dominant individuals are dominant so that they can get first crack at scarce resources or resources over which somebody is competing. And usually those resources have to do with food or mates. Those are the two big ones. The chimps are not overpopulated, but a lot of what happens in the community is that each community tries to hold territory that gives it enough of the resources, mostly food, that community needs. So, I mean, there again, we see a very similar thing with human groups and human nations trying to constantly defend the resources that we need. And it's very parallel.
Yeah. Here's another question for either one or both of you. This guest asks, with climate change, there is increasing talk of assisted migration, and we are already engaged in multiple reintroductions, rewildings of animals back into denuded landscapes. How can they survive without that historical, cultural knowledge? Good question.
The answer is that for those species that have cultural knowledge, which is quite a few, they cannot survive very well. And so some reintroductions have experienced 100% mortality of the animals that were released. This was especially true in the earlier days of trying to reintroduce animals about, let's say, 40 years ago or so, when everybody just thought, oh, well, by instinct, they're going to know what to do. We'll just open the cage and let them go. And they behaved like animals abandoned at the side of the road. They had no idea where they were or what, where was food or even what food was or what to do. More subtly, you could do something like reintroduce bighorn sheep into the Rockies and they'll do well all summer and they have no idea where to go in the winter because They didn't grow up there. They don't know the migration pathways. There's no one to follow. And it takes a few generations, maybe something like 6 or 10 generations, for them to, a very high mortality relative to a normal wild population, for them to reinvent a culture for that area.
Mm-hmm. Here we go. Now people are, I think the lid is coming off on questions, so rapid fire here. How are the species you studied being impacted by climate change, and how can we tread more lightly on the Earth?
Well, there are so many ways that we could tread more lightly, but how are they being affected? Climate is obvious to everybody who studies animals that I've come across, wild free-living animals that I've come across. It's not a theoretical thing. In the chimpanzee forest, the amount of fruit that they eat is declining, and the thinking is that the warming and drying of the forest that's happening slowly over time is causing that to happen. So they're having less food. It doesn't seem to have reached a critical point yet. It means, at least for the moment, they have to spend more time looking for food. So the Amazon also, we know that there are with the macaws, you know, there are a lot of problems with the Amazon, it drying out, people setting fires. I mean, how could we live more lightly? We live like a macerator. We are a species of 7 billion people, where everybody wants wood and water and space. And where do they take it from? They take it from non-living beings, and then they often go to war with with human beings. So, you know, that problem is kind of the same. Every decision we make, especially who to vote for, what kinds of food to eat, what to drive, how many children to have, what you want to do about your heating systems and your cooling system, all of these things every day bear on what we can do. I think if we do those things personally, it makes us aware of the problems, and then we need to act on the things that create the real policy change, and that has to do with our engagement with government and who we support and what kinds of things that we see, you know, enacted as groups.
Right, right. All right, here we go. It's like a lightning rod of different things people are wanting to know. Was there awareness of your presence, or did you attempt to be unnoticed? I think she's referring to when you were aboard with the researchers. Did they simply accept, or maybe the animals, did they simply accept you when it was clear you were not a threat?
That goes for the researchers and the other people. Yeah. The researchers mostly knew who I was by the time I got there. And they have worked with these animals so long that those creatures are habituated to their presence. But that's very interesting, because chimpanzees are afraid of human beings, but they know individuals, and they're not afraid of the ones who have worked with them a lot and have let them just get used to them, which takes years. They don't feed them or anything. It just takes years of them being there for the chimps to be okay with that and to grow up around it. But they're smart enough to know that if a total stranger is with somebody that they know, that stranger will be okay. And that was true for me with the chimpanzees. The whales know the sounds of boats. I don't know if they know those boats individually. And the macaws, interestingly enough, they were in a place where there's a fair amount of tourists coming and going. They see humans in a place where they are not hunted. Where they're hunted, either they're shot out or the remaining ones hide. Where they never see anybody, they're fearful because a human is a new thing, so they hide. But where they see people and they're not hunted, they will let you be there watching what they do. And I was the beneficiary of that there as well.
That's great. Wait, I'm going to wait a second for more questions to come in. I have a question, having thought a lot about what's going on in our oceans these days with plastics. And you touch on that. I think it was one of the junior whales was tangled in fishing line. Were you surprised by the abundance of plastic pollution that you saw in the oceans, or what's your takeaway on
Well,
that?
I see it. I see it all the time, everywhere, and I'm not surprised. I can tell you that it has hugely increased in recent decades. And no, I'm horrified, but I see it all the time, so it's not a surprise. It's really a terrible thing, though.
It is. Andrew, Andy, is there something you'd like to add while we wait for other guests to question? Was there more questions on your mind if you'd like to weigh in? If not, I can.
Well, yeah, I was hoping Carl would, we didn't get into the beauty part, the beauty section yet. And a mutual friend, I think David Rothenberg, who studies bird behavior, had done a book about the evolution and beauty and just the weirdness of beauty evolutionarily. And I remember reading his book about that. And you dove back into that terrain. Could you describe just a key finding or two before we close up?
Yeah, well, if you think about a bird that is very camouflaged, that is because if it's obvious, it will get eaten by a predator. So that is just basically luck. And that causes those animals to look camouflaged, of which there's many, many camouflaged animals. But if you think about something like a male cardinal that's bright red and stands out, why does it look like that? It looks like that because females like it that way. And it turns out that a lot of the ornamentation, like bright colors and horns and things like that, are not a result of just luck in the world or the action of the environment on determining which combination of genes will survive. They are chosen. Life chooses beauty a lot of the time. And if you start really thinking into this and looking around, you realize, first of all, how bizarre and profound it is that on this planet, something has happened in which the life that has arisen chooses for itself arbitrary beauties that are simply appealing, and that there is a strange universality to them. So that, for instance, we have a many billion-dollar flower industry because humans love the sight and the scent of flowers. Flowers exist only for pollination. Humans are not pollinators. We don't come from pollinators. We should have as little interest in flowers as we have with roots. And yet, these structures that have been chosen by pollinators for their appeal over many, many tens of millions of years appeal to us also. And I think that that universality of what counts as beautiful, because beauty is not the property of a flower, it's the perception that's created in a mind, in a nervous system. We create the perception of beauty. And for us to have the same perceptions of beauty as do birds about how birds look and what their songs sound like, and as do pollinators have, and on, is, I think, an astonishing aspect of life on Earth, and I think is a really, really profound thing.
That's great.
There was a section I was hoping you might read from that part of the book. The whole book is beautiful. There, at the epilogue, there's amazing lines, but I thought I talked to you earlier about maybe reading a short passage if there's time.
Sure. Okay, this is in the Peruvian Amazon, and we're going to look for the macaws. By the way, is it possible for me to share the screen at all?
Let's see. I think so. Look at your little green. Do you see a little green
arrow? It says
arrow?
host has disabled screen sharing.
Oh.
Are you there, Catherine?
I am here, and let's see if I can. All right. Try it now, Carl.
Yeah. Wow.
Okay. So we're going to talk about these birds for a few minutes in this passage, going to see them anyway, but I wanted to let you know what they look like. Okay. As the night's shades rise and the eyelids of morning begin to open, the world retells its creation story. I was expecting something like the explosive dawn chorus of springtime in the Northeast, but here the sun comes up slower, and so does the chorus. It starts with chanting. Dawn's main meditation soundtrack begins with razor-billed curassows who call like this. Inhale, hold, exhale, and with each exhalation send a deep resonant woo, like a superlatively large dove. As the curassows coo their ohms into the ravine, their meditative tolls get overlaid by three soft, insistently plaintive whistles, the timorous affirmations of an undulated tinamou. These two calls somehow reach each other inside my mind, meshing into one of the most beautiful things I've ever heard. Its slow rhythm feels like the whole forest is breathing. A forest at dawn can seem the quietest place on earth, yet it sparkles with sound. While the infinity of stars above underscore vast vacuums of space, the notes of Earth's living come across the quietude as frogs and trilling insects yield to birdsong. Susurrations and declarations, greetings and exclamations, all the living lit in conversation. Silence is not the absence of sound, it's the absence of noise. There are reasons to love so magic an interlude, but residing deeper than reason is the felt music of such plush silence. Dawn is the song that silence sings. In a recess of the world such as this forest, you can still hear the magic. Outside such whittled hideaways, one species fills up all the spaces between the notes. Nonetheless, I am cheered by the thought that as the eyelash of daybreak rolls endlessly across the planet, a chorus of birds is eternally greeting a new dawn. Don Brightsmith, who has brought me into this new magic, notes the approach of in the pre-dawn gloam of two scarlet macaws who are just silhouettes screeching. Two additional scarlets, flying over the tree canopy, remain dusky shapes against thin clouds. While the sky is still blue-gray, degrees of illumination cue others to appear on the soundstage. Oropendulas begin calling, their notes sounding like big drops of thick liquid. Motmots begin adding their rhythmic tom-toms. Their notes are so meditative and soothing that they set my mind adrift like a boat in long swells. Rise, subside. I'm afloat an emerald sea amidst shoals of birds. The volume comes up, until we are wrapped in a shimmering surround of songs and calls, some melodic, some emphatic. I want to know everything there is to know about this place, but not right now. For just a few minutes, I want to feel what there is to feel, to inhale this new oxygen, notice each sight, sound, scent, hear each call, distinguish each note in the orchestra, play attention, and then relax and let the great music wash over me while there remains the room and the time for it in this unruined corner of the world. The ode to joy that enlivens this planet, our home, generates information, of course, and it generates joy's byproducts, mystery and tragedy. The tragedy is that we humans have so overwhelmed ourselves in an information age where our own signals crisscross and messages bombard us and everything beeps for our attention. So we've stopped listening. The whole world continues calling out to us. For a few minutes, I am listening. This tropic dawn, slow-handed as love, rushes nothing. It savors its own time as it celebrates its daily rite of passage. It literally dawns on me that countless generations of singers who've continually come and gone have performed this soundtrack of renewed existence daily here for countless thousands of years. And if all had been as it's supposed to be, there'd be no end in sight. Just as the streaky clouds get edged with a palette of pinks, a few Amazon parrots arrive on shuddering wings. Landing on the bluff, the parrots talk, 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 In a few minutes, it will be 8 a.m. How long and rich a morning can be if you bring yourself fully to it. Come to a decent place. Bring nothing to tempt your attention away. Immerse in the timelessness of reality. Attention paid is repaid with interest.
Oh,
Thank you.
Beautiful.
thank you. Thank you so much. That was a beautiful reading and a really, really lovely way to wrap up this event, which has been just terrific conversation on really meaningful topics. The book, again, I just wanted to say how much I really enjoyed it, learned a ton, and highly recommend it for yourself or as a gift, or anybody will just really be taken by the adventure and the science and the writing itself, which is, as you've just heard, quite beautiful. So I'd like to, on behalf of RJ Julia Wesleyan and BookHampton, to thank you all very much for being here this evening with us. Thank you to Carl and Andy for a wonderful conversation. Links are up right now for where you can buy the book at all 3 of our locations. And, you know, we look forward to having you, maybe Andy and Carl, stop by the store when that is able and safe on the beautiful Connecticut shoreline. We'll look forward to that, and just thank you all very much. I hope you've enjoyed your evening, and take a look at the links before you sign off to purchase a book. Thank you very much.
Great.
Thank you very much. I've enjoyed it a lot, and I really appreciate your time. I appreciate Andy's time. I appreciate the time of everybody who tuned in tonight. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bravo. Great to see you, Carl.
Mm-hmm.
Great book.
Thank you. Come on out, Andy. The
Oh,
ocean's
yeah.
here.
I'll be there.
Okay.